Hello, I'm Sherry Hutt, author of the Cruise Through History storybooks and a frequent cruise ship presenter. And today I'd like to take you to Ravenna, Italy, increasingly a cruise port option for Venice. And for that, we turn to Cruise Through History Itinerary 2, The Stories of Rome to Venice, for the story of Ravenna and one of my favorite characters in history, Galla Placidia. This is a woman who stared down the Roman Senate, kept the Huns from burning Rome. She was a savvy diplomat and a devoted mother. And the city where she endowed beautiful mosaics in churches was the center of her rule as Augusta in Ravenna. Born in 390 in Constantinople to royal parents, her mother was the daughter of an emperor. Her father, Theodosius, was emperor in Rome, which made her at a very young age an heir to royal dominance, which was very important, very advantageous for Galla because her father died when she was 5. She went to live in Rome with her cousins. And while she was in Rome, the Visigoths put a siege around Rome. It lasted for years, and Galla was taken hostage. She would be a ransom point because her half-brother Honorius was the emperor in Ravenna, and her nephew Theodosius II was the emperor in Constantinople. So Galla had value as a bargaining chip. And in 4 years of her captivity, Galla, who was now about 18, had fallen in love. She married in the south of France. In their travels through what we know as southern Europe, she visited tombs that Constantine the Great, the founder of Constantinople, the first Roman Christian emperor, had built these tombs for his 2 children. And he embellished these tombs with lovely mosaics by artisans of the day. And Galla was much impressed by the mosaics, really endowed by a man who she very much revered. When she was released and came back into the family fold, Honorius decreed that she must marry a Roman general, Constantius. Constantius was, shall we say, inept. He had been the one who was to garner Galla's release and had been unable to do so. Well, they were married and they had 2 children, Valentinian, who Galla hoped would someday be emperor, and Honorius, a rebellious young woman. Well, Constantius was not pleased being married to a powerful woman. And while Honorius left Galla to rule so he could chase women from Ravenna to Constantinople, Constantius made enemies, and by 420, Constantius was dead, and Galla ruled as Augusta. Now, back in Rome, there was a dissension between powerful bishops debating who should be in charge of the Christian church. Galla stepped into the controversy and came up with a resolution. She was the first to use the word pope for the father of all bishops. And in a conciliatory move toward Rome, she designated Rome as the home of the Pope. But her dynasty was not to be. Galla died in the year 450, and by 455, Valentinian too was dead, the victim of assassins. The dream of Galla for a dynasty died with him. So we go to Ravenna, the center of Galla's Christian world, where she endowed churches as had Constantine, with artisans in the best mosaics. When we go to the church of Saint Giovanni Evangelista, that we know as Saint John, we walk in and we see only white plaster on the upper walls. The mosaics that Galla would have endowed in this church were removed over time. And what we're looking at as we go from church to church in Ravenna is a transition in the evolution of the cosmology of that which is the Christian church today, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. Next, we go to the very large and elegant Saint Vital, because this is our entrance to the mausoleum of Galla Placidia. Pause first in this grand church. This came in the 6th century after Galla Placidia. But the mosaics that adorn these high arches, these eloquent speaking of the mystery of the church, were certainly done in the style of Galla, but imbued with the cosmology as it developed. This whole site is a World Heritage Site today. And we come out into the garden to a very small building, and this is the Mausoleum of Galla Placidia, the best preserved of all of her achievements. When we go into the mausoleum, inside that tower is the central arch, and the building is supported by heavy arches because they did not yet have the technology for the height that we saw in Saint Vital. And what we're looking at is very early iconographic styles of the Christian church. We see Christ with his book of sins and merits. We see St. Lawrence. St. Lawrence was very important to Galla because it was to St. Lawrence that she credited her safe passage during her lifetime and with her young children as she went across the Adriatic from Ravenna to Constantinople. We ponder this building, this small, contained legacy of Galla Placidia. And there you will see some sarcophagus. Now, some will say that Galla Placidia was buried in one of these, but that's not the fact. Had she been, there would have been different Christian symbols on there. These date probably to about the 14th century, and some young boys in about 1577 came in kind of wanting to know who was in these burial tombs, and they had candles which they dropped by accident as they were looking at ghosts, and it burned, unfortunately, the contents. So we'll never know who was actually buried there. Probably some later royal wanting an association with Galla Placidia. So they look interesting, but they don't date to the 5th century. Now, the next building I want to take you to, also with beautiful Galla era mosaics for which she is rarely given credit, and that is the baptistry. That baptismal font dating to the 5th century. And we look at mosaics in the style that we have just seen in the mausoleum. Very early Christian art. Looking at saints, looking at writing that is both Roman and Christian, as we're looking at a very unique place. We know we are somewhere in history that is not yet the finalized definition of the Catholic Church. And these mosaics have lasted all of these years, preserved as Galla would have wished them. As we look around, we see some of the later installations, and you see the seashell that we think of as Saint Jacques and the seashell, and later pilgrimages probably to Santiago de Compostela. The seashell was also a symbol in the ancient world where Athena rose from a seashell. So we're seeing this crossover between the pagan area and the Christian icons. And one last church I want to take you to in Ravenna is the church known today as Saint Apollinaire di Novo. Saint Apollinaire was actually a Syrian bishop, but in the 8th century, as Islam was growing in Syria, his remains were removed and taken to Ravenna for safekeeping. And in this church of mosaics that date to the era of Galla are also later Christian mosaics. So look up in this church, magnificent in its glory. We see a whole row of royal women, each with a different personality, each with a different face, now today holding offerings to the Christ, but in their day likely benefactors of the church. And we see saints, those mosaics newer, up higher than those that we see from the earlier church, from the time of Gala. We see the three kings coming across, looking as they would have as they came across from Constantinople, possibly going to Jerusalem. So we see very early depictions of the three kings giving their offerings to the Christ child. And you'll see the curtains. What are those curtains? That is a depiction of the palace of an Aryan king. So again, crossing over the nave, crossing over the altar of this magnificent church in Ravenna is the history of the development of the Christian cosmology. From its early days with Gala and with her father, and into the later saints and Saint Apollinaire, for whom it's named today. Before we leave Ravenna, I want to give you one last note, and that is in 1371, Dante came to Ravenna. He spent the last 4 years of his life in this city, and this is where he wrote the Divine Comedy. He said that Ravenna was a paradise. It was for him his earthly paradise. And in his memory in Ravenna, one of the theaters is named for him. And so we leave this historic city, endowed by a woman of taste, of power, of development of a church in a time when the world was in such a flux, and she gave peace and beauty to an area that we now enjoy. So many stories in so many ports, and I enjoy sharing them with you. Please be with me on a future video, or perhaps we will meet on a cruise ship. And until then, be well.